Hello and welcome to Integrating Eros and the School of Relational Bodywork. I'm the founder of the school. My name's Julian Marcus, and in this live call, you'll see the discussion and exploration of the topic of the divine masculine and feminine. I'm sharing this discussion with the teacher, Pete Bampton, who is the founder of the Awaken Life Project, which ran for 15 years, exploring conscious awakening and community here in Portugal, where we both live. In this call, we invited the public to join us for a discussion of the sacred dance of Shiva and Shakti. And this exploration is designed to explore beyond the binary perception of duality between masculine and feminine or gender roles, and take us into an internal alchemical exploration of our own self-organizing, self-regulating, and self-healing intelligence that possesses both these qualities that we could say are masculine or feminine, and we can think of them like an electrical charge of positive and negative, not in the sense of commonly seen negative as bad and positive as good, but as necessary poles within the dance of our life. So we're joined by members of the public from all around the world, and we discuss themes of romance, right relationship, coming into relationships wanting to complete ourselves, the notion of here, meet my other half, and the idea of lacking and wanting to be completed by a partner in a romantic, spiritual, sexual, emotional relationship. So Pete shares some insights in his work within community and working with men. We have a guest appearance from our friend Peter Littlejohn Cook, which was a nice surprise, sharing about some of the ancient practices, which in a modern context might seem a bit bizarre, but are useful to decouple romance and spiritual evolution in the self. And Pete and I will be running a retreat the 28th of March to the 2nd of April. We've shortened it to the 2nd of April to make it more accessible for everyone as a 5-day retreat. We saw that the cost benefit for everyone was quite substantial to reduce the retreat by 2 days. So 28th to the 2nd of April, 28th of March. And that's at Mont Mariposa Retreat Center, which we're both dearly fond of, down in the Algarve. And if you're interested in these themes, we're going to have another call, same time, 7 p.m. next week, Thursday, the 1st of February. And it will be the same Zoom link, which I'll link below if you're inspired to join us. And if you're interested in the retreat, please go to thefireoftheheart.net or my site, relationalbodywork.org, and look at retreats, and you'll see Shiva and Shakti. You can find out more information there and enroll if you're inspired to do so. Thank you so much. Enjoy the recording, and I invite you to feel into these themes and the body poem guided practice that's shared at the beginning and the end. So welcome everyone. Welcome Pete Bampton. Pete Bampton invited me some weeks ago, and we've been excitedly exploring this topic of Shakti and Shiva and the different approaches and work that we've shared over the years. And this call is intended to have value in of itself. So it's not a sales call about the retreat, but an exploration of the topic and questions and answers relating to the retreat if we get there. So yeah, as I said, the opening practice that I would like to offer this evening is one from a modality called body poem. And I'll invite us all into the role of the dreamer. So we can all have our ideas around what Shakti and Shiva means, the embodiment of the masculine and feminine. And Pete and I are in agreement about each individual, no matter their sexual expression and preference and what's between their legs, has masculine and feminine intelligence and potential in their body, in their mind, in their being. And the so-called feminine pole, be it a man or a woman or whatever expression, I think in India, Pete, there are recognized in some traditions 9 sexes. There's a whole scale between kind of what's traditionally in the West seen as a man and a woman. I'm sure I've been told,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've
So
heard of that in some indigenous traditions as well.
yeah. So if we think of the body and the mind and the pelvis, we could say that our feminine pole of our intelligence is our felt sense in the belly, the gut brain, and the pelvis. So this is an invitation into the body, into feeling. So I invite you to get, as I said, it's a 7 to 10 minute practice. And I invite you to feel and notice. You might like to have a pen and paper to hand, or because coming out and typing onto the keyboard can be a bit of an interruption, but it's totally, we do it every week in Body Poem, people type. So if you prefer to just type what you're noticing in, then do that, or write them and then type them into the chat. So I'm going to invite you into 3 layers of wants, and to give full permission to your wants and to not to judge them. If you don't want to share them in the group chat, you don't have to share them, but those that you feel to share, please type them into the chat as we go, and I'll read them back, which will serve as a community body poem. And you can feel other people's words and what other people are sharing, and it creates a kind of alchemy of landing on the topic, acknowledging our body wisdom rather than going into a mental discussion of theory. So how does that sound for people? Got some nodding. Cool. Great. So first stage of this is just to get comfortable. And I invite you to have soft eyes. We can have soft eyes on the screen first of all, and just notice the other faces and smiles and people who have taken the time to come here tonight on this topic. And just getting a bodily sense of gratitude for the presence of the others who are here with us tonight. And knowing that the container of this call is to lend insight to our masculine and feminine that we all possess, and perhaps to grow our awareness of those, that we may live happier, more awakened and fulfilled lives. And feeling the support of whatever surface you're sat on, the chair, the floor, the ground beneath you. And if possible, having your torso supported by something. So your back leaning on something. Got someone else joining us now. Elena is coming in. So feeling the body supported. And when our body is supported, this supports the parasympathetic nervous system and down regulation. When our torso is not supported, we feel like we're going into action and doing, and it arouses the sympathetic nervous system. So just encouraging the body into relaxation through that support. And feeling the supportive effect of gravity on your body. Helena, we're doing a short 7 to 10 minute practice to tune into the body and feel what we might want as an inquiry into this topic of Shakti and Shiva. So I invite you to join. We're just grounding into feeling supported. If you feel to join us, feeling the ground beneath you, the chair that's supporting you, and taking your trunk into a sense of support. And then what would it be like to feel the global sense of gravity hugging down on the mass of the body, the bones, the tissues, the muscles, the fascia, hugging us to the earth? Can you get a felt sense of that? And surrender into it, feeling supported by the chair, the ground, the wall, the sofa, whatever you're sat on. And now bringing the awareness to the breath and this upward rising force of the rise and fall of the chest, the belly, the midline. Can you feel your midline? And inviting you to release the body to the in-breath and release the body to the out-breath. Not to manage the breath, but or control it, but to allow more space in the body for the inhalation and more space in the body for the exhalation. And then I invite you to trust that any wants that arise into your awareness, that you can share, only the ones you wish to share. But I'm going to take us through 3 levels of wants. The first is anything that comes up and arises into your consciousness. Just any want that you have right now. It might be for warmer feet. It might be for a new job. Just let any wants surface up with full permission, zero judgment. And you can just make a mental note of them or softly open your eyes and type them into the chat. We'll spend a couple of minutes on 3 layers of wants. The first is general. Any wants that are rising up into your awareness. Warmer arms. More men interested in this theme. What wants are present in your awareness, rising up from the body, from associative channels of the topic tonight, being on Zoom, or being led in a meditation or somatic practice. Any wants that are there. And then moving on to a second layer of wants. I invite you to tune into what you want on the level of embodied balance of Shakti and Shiva, sacred masculine and feminine, which may look like I want to strengthen my masculine pole in service of my creativity. Or it might just be more information. Whatever that looks like, what do you want as you sit here in this call? What brought you to the call? What inspires you on this topic? What would you like to receive more of in your life or see more of in the world? A new paradigm for sex, more men interested in this theme, warmer arms, for people to find peace and balance with the balance inside of themselves, to create a safe container through which more
women should be.
More women can discover who they really are. And bringing it closer to yourselves, what would you like tonight to experience, to learn, to share, to receive in this hour together on the topic of sacred Shakti and Shiva? What would you like for this evening? What would be your greatest wish? insights into sex and spirit, to be inspired by polarity and integrate others' experience on this topic, share heart connection and honest reflection, to create a safer container through which women can discover who they really are, for people to find peace and balance with the balance inside of themselves, a new paradigm of sex, more men interested in this theme, warmer arms, more men interested in this theme, a new paradigm for sex, more people to find peace and balance within themselves, and to create a container, a safer container through which more women can discover who they really are, to share heart connection and honest reflection, insights into spirit and sex, to be inspired by polarity and integrate those others' experience on this topic, to lose the fear around my too strong masculine, or to recognize more my feminine, an aliveness of Kundalini, want more meaningful relationships, to live in more beautiful natural environment, want to do things that are more aligned with where and what I am, to see myself in beauty, see more love being the base of communication, to see myself in beauty, do things that are more aligned with where and what I am, to live in a more beautiful natural environment, more meaningful relationships, aliveness of Kundalini, to recognize and lose the fear around the too strong masculine and recognize more my feminine. Be inspired by polarity and integrate those experiences of others. See more love as the base of communication. Thank you. Beautiful sharings. So inviting you, if you need some orientation, to slowly open the eyes if they've been asleep, and just being aware of your physical edges. And the next thing we build to do is to ask each other a few questions, Pete, wasn't it? And then we would love to hear from those present any questions or reflections on this theme, and we can have a bit of a discussion. How's that sound, everybody? So, Pete, shall I start by asking you a few questions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, one theme around this masculine and feminine is the seeking of happiness, and getting the idea of consciously creating a relationship to get what you need and want, perhaps from the notion of the cup's half empty. If I meet my other half, I'll be complete, I'll be more happy, I'll feel more love.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking as you said that in English, people sometimes refer to their partner as "this is my other half." I don't know if you're aware of that expression.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to give a context to this whole theme, obviously, if we're talking about Shiva and Shakti, this implies a deeply spiritual context for looking not only at our experience of being men and women, masculine, feminine energies, but also how we engage in and embrace the dimension of emotional sexual intimacy. So just as Julian emphasized at the beginning, what we're speaking about here is not man and woman, and in terms of gender, essentially, it's this fundamental polarity that is at the very heart of creation. And in India, the understanding of Shiva and Shakti is that the Shiva, what we could call the Shiva principle, which we could also call the masculine pole of the totality of everything and nothing that is. So the Shiva principle is that pure consciousness, that pure ground that eternal, unmanifest, ever-present reality that is consciousness itself. And all of us are constantly rooted in and experiencing that consciousness, right? That's the continuum of our experience through waking, dreaming, sleeping. I am. And, you know, none of us can actually remember a time when we didn't exist, even though apparently we were born as a body mind. So there's an eternal dimension of what we could call consciousness, which I'm associating with the Shiva pole, which of course we find emphasized a lot in the traditional spiritual approaches, you know, both East and West, mainly through the path of meditation and going inward and renunciation of body, mind, and world. But the other dimension, which is all of our experience pretty much all the time, except when we're in deep sleep, is body, mind, and world. And this is what I'm pointing to in terms of Shakti. So Shakti is the creation, is the ever-flowing and ever-present and astoundingly varied expressions of form. And Shakti arises out of Shiva. So something comes out of nothing. This is one way to understand it. So, as I was saying, traditionally, the orientation, and we can see this in religion, has been to identify Shiva as spirit or the masculine principle, and to deny or repress the feminine or Shakti. And this is one of the major reasons that we're so screwed up in our culture, and especially in Western culture. You also find this bias in the East, of course. But you know what came along in our cultural baggage was Christianity and the whole concept of original sin, which Saint Augustine invented. It was nothing to do with Jesus, and basically the denigration of the body, and the denigration of sexuality, the suppression of sexuality, and therefore the suppression of women. So a big aspect of our cultural conditioning over, you know, millennia now is this suppression of what we could call the divine feminine. So that's a big picture explanation. I hope you get some sense of it, of those two. We could think of it as two sides of one coin. And of course, ultimately, Shiva and Shakti are inseparable. There's no world that we cannot perceive a body or mind or a world without consciousness. And while it is possible to let go of mind, body, and world, to discover and experience our true nature as pure consciousness, and through that path, we might discover what we could call the truth, the absolute truth of eternity, of beginningless and endless being, consciousness, bliss, as they say in India, Satchitananda, being, consciousness, bliss. We can discover that. But if we want to become a whole, complete and embodied expression, whether we're a man or a woman, of the divine, and I believe in our time, this is what more and more of us are feeling and waking up to, is we want to embrace love, you see, because our true nature as spirit encompasses truth, we could say, and love. And love is our true nature in relationship. So one way, I think, to understand the time we're living in, and, you know, I think it's reflected in the fact that it's almost entirely women on this call, is that, yeah, we're going through a time of a tipping point time, I think, in all dimensions, geopolitical, everything, But on more deeply in terms of spiritually and in the dynamics between men and women, I think there's more and more longing, and especially amongst women, to discover who they really are in and as themselves in this higher spiritual context, and not having to compete for equality in a man's world. So we could say that, you know, feminism broadly, while that was very positive in social political ways, was really about women gaining more equality in a man's world. So this is where I think why I'm very enthused by this theme, and I feel that this, what I call the dance of Shiva and Shakti, is what is longing to come alive between conscious men and women. And I also want to add, just as Julian said, that this also goes for homosexual relationships, because if there's an authentic homosexual relationship, we'll find that there's a polarity there, because there is no attraction without this polarity. So roughly, based on the research, or as far as I'm aware, we could say that most men, maybe around 80% of men, have a stronger masculine essence, Shiva resonance in their being. And most women have a stronger resonance, receptivity to the Shakti principle. But of course, we also embody within ourselves, as just human beings, regardless of our gender, both of these energies, these what we could call spiritual polarities or principles. So that's a brief introduction in terms of the big picture. And I'll just say something very brief about how I see the process of us as men and women becoming aligned with that. And then we'll see where we want to take it, where Julian wants to take it, or any of you. Is that as Julian was just taking us into presence, into the breath, into deep relaxation, into what we could call meditation. When we let go of our striving, seeking, anxious, disturbed sense of self, progressively we automatically drop into our true being, or what we could call, we begin to intuit the spiritual heart, and we discover peace, balance, a sense of harmony. So we drop into our true being, and in that we recognize that God, we want to use the word God, is already here. We're already immersed in and animated by life, right? We're being breathed, right? We're being lived by a principle that far transcends ourself. You know, we're not ultimately in control here. So when we fall back, as Julian was saying, you know, in the metaphor of sitting back, you know, leaning on a chair, for example, when he was saying that relaxes the nervous system, that's symbolic of letting go of the separate sense of self that's trying to find God, trying to seek love, right? Feels itself to be separate, feels itself to be lacking, and therefore looks into the world and into the field of relationship, longing to find, to discover, to seek, to get what we feel is fundamentally missing. So when Julian was referring to the metaphor of the empty, half full cup, I've got one cup here, but we can imagine two. So most people are lost in this illusion of being a separate self. One metaphor I like to use to describe this is of a whirlpool in an ocean, right? And the whirlpool's going round and round, me, my desires, my fears. And it creates this illusion of being a separate self that's separate from the whole. And then as a whirlpool, we're somehow looking to find union again with the ocean, with the water. And when we fall back into our true being, we recognize, oh my God, it's here. It's here. Happiness, fullness, peace is already here. So in this metaphor, that would be that the cup starts to fill up. And then, you know, if we really give ourselves to a practice, for example, of meditation, and it can take many forms, you know, we just take the time to look after ourselves, take the time to go for a walk in the woods. We take time to be with ourselves and let go of all our ambitions, our needs, and our wants and our anxieties. And we might start to discover that the cup starts to overflow. And we start to recognize that who we are as a human being, as a man or a woman, is sufficient, is not only sufficient, but we are love itself. Our true nature is love itself. And we begin to feel very deeply. So the more we awaken, the more we begin to feel, and we begin to shift out of the mental body. You know, that's one way of looking at the madness of modern culture, right? Everyone's living in this rational mental body, which is out of touch with true feeling. So as we get into touch with true feeling, we start to experience the natural radiance and overflowing of love. And you see then our experience of desire or wanting, as we started with in this body poem, begins to be transformed, because as long as we're convinced that we're a separate ego, our desire will primarily be selfish. It will be self-seeking, wanting for me. But when we begin to make this shift into a deeper sense of who we are, that we can't really define with the mind, then we begin to experience what we could call love desire. Right? So in the spiritual traditions, they wanted to try and cut off desire, as somehow that's always to be associated with the ego. But that's not a true and full embrace of our experience as human beings. So then we begin to overflow with love desire. And then there's an alchemy of attraction that goes beyond, you know, I need for me, or I'm looking for my other half so that I can feel completed, you see. So the dance of Shiva and Shakti is that potential that can begin to be experienced and realized when we have two full and overflowing cups. And in that experience of integration, when we become a full and overflowing cup, as a man, we integrate the masculine and the feminine, the Shiva and the Shakti within ourselves. As a woman, we begin to integrate those polarities. And the result is not the depolarization of the sexes as we're experiencing in postmodern culture. This, to me, is one of the distortions that so many people are suffering. Postmodern culture, in its proclamation of egalitarianism, which of course is very positive, also often proclaims that men and women are the same. And while at the level of spirit, of fundamental beingness and consciousness, we are the same, we are one. At the level of our embodiment and our animation of spirit as men and women, there's a lot of very important authentic differences. So the journey is really discovering, you know, and I don't claim to have all the answers to this. Well, what would it look like to be an authentically liberated, fully embodied, feeling man who wants to be in service and be a vehicle of love to the divine Shakti, to the feminine? And on the other side, what would it be like for a woman to discover who she is, completely free from any reaction to patriarchy and trying to be equal to men, you know, trying to compete with men? You know, for a woman to drop into and rediscover perhaps what women did experience, you know, several thousand years ago before patriarchy took hold. Because if we look at the evidence, you know, there was a culture of the goddess. The woman and sexuality was revered as sacred before patriarchy came along and split off the feminine. So yeah, that'll do for, I think I've said quite a lot already, but hopefully that gives a sense of how I see this dance. And as I emphasized, it's a journey. It's about letting go of a need to come to a destination and to be in a journey, to be in a dance together.
Thank you, Pete. Any questions there for Pete's share in response to Pete's sharing from anybody here? Unmute yourself or put them in the chat there. Pete, shall I share something about individual Shakti, Shiva, and body poem? And
yes, yeah, go for it.
So you've all had a mini experience there of tuning into and listening. I find it interesting, Pete's sharing of the absolute Shiva, of nothingness, out from which everything that is manifest and the world of phenomena be the Shakti. And I was reflecting on the process of somatics, which more recently I like to think of as sacred somatics. I co-taught a workshop where the facilitator said, if you have questions of a spiritual nature, come to me. And if you've got a question of a body-based nature, come to Julian. And I said quite candidly in front of the group, I disagree. I feel that our spiritual embodiment is vitally important, and honoring the body wisdom in our authentic soulful expression is very necessary. So in terms of polarity there, my teachers guided me in an exploration, not a taking on a rational truth, that I'll just change this 1 second, we could look at the masculine pole of our being as the rational mind, and we could look at explicit knowledge that we can talk about, and Pete's just shared, can come out of the realm of the sacred feminine, and perhaps when doing and speaking is infused with a quality of being, we're most in alignment with spirit. So if the masculine pole of our being is the rational and the explicit, I can talk about this, I can identify this as separate from me. This part of our being is very good at reducing things and naming things. This is a pen, this is a lip balm, this is a plug. But the place where all these things come into wholeness and come into relationship is in the feminine. And in the feminine pole of my being, if I drop into the body, if I try to manage my heart and say, oh, I should live as a more open-hearted person, I might be micromanaging that from my head, from the explicit and from the masculine controlling, micromanaging pole of my being, which is very useful if I've got to write to-do lists and do tasks and work through these discrete, separate tasks. I need to use this pole. But my friend and teacher, author Philip Shepherd said, the primary wound of our culture is a cleavage, a cut between thinking and being. And I think this is a huge one, which leads to separatism and isms and othering of other people, be it sexual, sexual preferences, presentations. We're getting more and more names for people that feel persecuted or separate from the binary norm, and that the polarity of masculine, feminine is seen as a duality, as a binary. Whereas my work, I would say, is encouraging people into a dual exploration of merging and integrating the masculine and the feminine inside the body. Elaine's raised their hand. I'll just finish what I was saying and then take that question, Elaine. So if we see that whatever idea we have or goal, if we come to it as we did in the beginning from the body sense, which we could say is the gut brain and the pelvic brain, we know that through polyvagal theory, the rich plexus of nerves links their mind, the heart, the belly, the gut, and the pelvis. So all of these centers of intelligence are constantly updating one another, and we can bring science to why it's been important in the Chinese system to honor the three dantians, the mental, spiritual, the emotional, feeling, heart, and all the organ intelligences of the torso, and the belly, pelvis as the lower brain. And so one practice that we can do to celebrate and integrate masculine and feminine within ourselves, we've had a tiny little glimpse of tonight, which is to allow implicit, the hidden, the dark, the inward, the felt of the I wants. And as they come up into consciousness, we can measure them against, are these really what I want? Or are they what other people told me I should have, like a new car, a bigger this, a shinier that, the newest iPhone? You know, as Pete said, if we start to tune into what our wants are, and then we're honest in this place of relaxation and support and down regulation and merging with our true self, often what's arising we realize we don't want, and we can cast them aside, and other more vulnerable and truthful wants come up. So this is listening to the feminine pole of our being and allowing those association channels to bring them up into the conscious mind, into the masculine, and to bring both parts of this intelligence online when we have a challenge or a decision to make, to confer, not in a separate way. People language, oh, we should listen to our body more. But if we're listening to our body more, that suggests that we're putting a cup against the wall and that our body is another room from who we really are. So we are a wholeness. And I very much like to bring practices to my clients and groups that reveal that wholeness and start to bring the alchemy of the masculine and feminine into relationship. So I hope that's served some clarity on why we did the practice earlier and what we can do as an individual to find a balance between Shakti and Shiva within the individual polarity of our intelligences here in the body. Elaine, would you like to speak your question? Hey.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I don't know. This is the first time I'm meeting you and everyone in this group, and so I'm not familiar with your work, but I have a background in Tantra. But more importantly, instead of the Shakti and Shiva teachings, for me, I kind of I've always been on a spiritual path. And when Pete ultimately brought the two together in the process of alignment, which is dropping into your true being and realizing that we are manifestations of God, that's really when it all comes together. And, certainly shedding my sexual shame had a lot to do with increasing my power as a female. And I think every woman should, definitely explore their sexual shame, and come to terms with it and rise and evolve beyond it. What I'm trying to say is, this is one terminology to get to spiritual evolution, which is to realize the oneness, and that there are different avenues to get there. And I turned away from Tantra because it was always so focused on sex and wasn't focused enough on spirit. And I started with Eckhart. I began with Eckhart Tolle in A Course in Miracles, and I found the wisdoms that they were giving me are more valuable than the schools of Tantra that I had enrolled in. And then I just want to share an observation. A client of mine, he actually is a professor who teaches ancient languages of Sanskrit and Hebrew. And although he's intellectualized this, his life is very mundane, pretty much. And he's having migraines, and he's kind of like, he's learned all this knowledge, but it's almost like it's in a compartment of his being, because it hasn't flowed into any spiritual evolution. And he's not a spiritual person. He's strictly teaching this as a body of knowledge. And it amazes me, because I've said to him, I said, you have all this knowledge of the Gnostics and all this ancient language and history, and I have only the tip of an iceberg knowledge, but yet the spiritual growth that I have has, I continue to evolve, and I actually stopped having migraines because of certain transformations that I've gone through, and the the alchemy that's taken place in my overall being. So it was just an interesting observation that I made with, about him versus me, versus knowledge versus putting into practice some powerful spiritual principles,
Thanks, Elaine.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I shared to Pete earlier on our phone in preparation to this a Carl Jung quote. Intellectualism is a common cover-up for the fear of direct experience. So I've noticed that in my own family, and I've given books to members of my family, and they've said, oh yeah, I know all that stuff, and given me the book back. But like you, I've observed that they're perhaps not living it in their life, and they cannot be told. So my position on that is, one day they might ask for the book back. In the meantime, I've offered it to Pete Bampton because, being willing to take on board and practice and try and have direct experience, for me, is key. And in Body Poem, we have this saying, I think one of you said, it was an earlier call. I did a podcast today, and she was saying to make the invisible visible, and to feel more, to fear less. So if we give practical priority to our spiritual inquiry, we can live and see where the results of that practice and how it responds and lives in others, without going out to teach people or preach or correct or suggest wrongness in the other. We can just live our spiritual principles, which is what we're inviting in this discussion, isn't it, Pete? To live in our naturalness.
Yeah, I'd also like to respond to what you said about why you had turned away from Tantra. And I know that Peter, who's just joined, great to see you, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
I know he'll resonate very much with me on this. So I'm quite ambivalent about using this term Tantra, because it has been so distorted and cheapened in the West. So the true meaning of Tantra, at least as far as I'm aware, you see, to the degree I've studied it in India, ancient India, it came out of the insight and feeling recognition that I was describing earlier, of the weave of emptiness and form, of consciousness and energy as being one. So it was a somewhat of a reaction to the spiritual traditions that tended to deny the goddess, the world of form. But in those times, if you were to enter into a true tantric path and practice, you had already, any aspirant would have undergone profound discipline, usually would be renunciate, and the actual emphasis, the dimension of sexuality was a very small part of what was traditionally, there are a number of different expressions of what we broadly call Tantra. So, and of course, and it was also very much out of the context of the romantic relational context that most Westerners are usually fascinated with. So, on the description for this retreat that Julian and I are doing, I did say an investigation into a true tantra of embodied
yes, and I did
awakening.
read that there wasn't going to be
Yeah.
sexual activity per se,
Yeah, and so
which I thought was great, because most of the Western tantra things, they want to have a sexual experience, thinking that that means it's tantra.
Yeah, so you know, there's a place for that. I think, as I was saying earlier, we're coming out, many of us are growing out of a completely distorted and dysfunctional Western culture that has denied sexuality, you know, made it shameful. And, you know, and then on the flip side, you have, you know, all of this sort of sex positive culture that we're immersed in now, with pornography being normalized, sexual objectification everywhere we look. But this is not actually bringing people into a deeper feeling, intimate relationship.
Can I just ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my question is there a model of a relationship that does not include romance? That's why I'm single. 5 years now, because I refuse to go into the romance model again. And I don't think I could meet a man who knows what I mean by that. So I would have to become really familiar what that means to me before I can explain it to someone else. But it would certainly not include romance in the sense of the traditional Western type of relationshiping. Yeah, I would like to see that addressed on a broad scale.
I'll just respond briefly to that.
Pete,
so we
Pete, sorry, could we park that question just because Adrienne has had her hand up for a while, but we'll get back to it. Could we pause and come back to that? Because
sure, okay, it's a great question.
I also have a few things to share on that, Elaine, as well. But I'd just like to take your question, Adrienne.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, first of all, that it's such a joy, Pete Bampton, to be in your company again. Just to sit with you. I met Pete at a retreat last July, and we shared a lot of conversations. And what I want to really say, actually, to the group in general is, I unfortunately will not be able to attend your retreat. I do very much enjoy and really welcoming this opportunity, and just maybe flagging that perhaps there might be further throughout your year to come or something, that maybe further opportunities for us to meet this way. But yeah, I wanted to say really that I have started this huge reawakening of my feminine, and it really has been going on for a few years, maybe about 3 years, but really it took off in such a strong way at that retreat. And it was actually very challenging and difficult for me as well. But my real point is that the reawakening and the reconnection with my sexual energy, as celibate, haven't been with a man for a long time, is enormously continuing. It's continuing all the time, and it's having really powerful effects on all parts of my life. I have greater energy, I have greater sort of joy, and I'm feeling a lot of that overflowing love, Pete, that you mentioned. Not all the time, of course, but it is really quite interesting that, yes, I would love a relationship with a man, but it feels to me like it's actually a very exciting relationship I'm having with this new awakening side of myself, and it's very mysterious, and that's the mystery of Shakti, I guess. So thank you. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing.
Beautiful.
Did you want?
Maybe.
Did you want to now respond to Elaine?
Yeah, I'll just touch back on that, and yeah, I'm glad we had Adrienne share there, because, as I was saying in the metaphor, when we become a full and perhaps overflowing cup, as a man, as a woman, and in that process, the Shiva and Shakti polarity within ourselves becomes more integrated, and as a result of that integration, we start to experience that wholeness and joy that you were just describing. And the way you said, yeah, yes, I would love to, and I would be open to having a deeper relationship with a man, who could meet me in this. But it's not a need in the same way that romantic love usually is. So going back to what Elaine was saying, you know, the whole glorification of romance, you know, again, it's a very Western phenomenon. I mean, as you're probably aware, in India, people don't get together and get married because of romance. It's arranged marriages. And, you know, while I'm not necessarily condoning that either, it's interesting that in the nation, in the country, which is in many respects the spiritual heart of the world, the repository of wisdom in the world, that they don't put so much emphasis on romance. And why is that? Because it comes and it goes. Because it's basically, and science has basically discovered that it's almost entirely based on our hormones. Now, you know, much of the experience of what is popularly called falling in love is hormonal, you know, and that's why why do we have the 7-year itch, you know, when people tend to have challenges in their long-term relationships. I read something not long ago that they discovered that, you know, something starts to change hormonally, because once the child is 7 years old, well, the man can move on and sow his seed somewhere else. So we're biologically programmed in all kinds of ways that we're usually unconscious of. And that's not to denigrate the experience of what we could call falling in love. But my experience anyway is that once we begin to find that fundamental fullness in and as ourselves, in other words, when we're not looking for love to complete ourselves, right, then we can potentially experience a romance with another, but it would only work with an other who is also overflowing, essentially, in that sense. You could call it romance with a capital R, you know, but then the falling in love is not a sort of infatuation of two egos, you know, becoming completely bonded together in a cult of two, an exclusive cult of two. Then as you fall in love with that man or that woman, you're falling in love with them and everything you appreciate about them as a unique individual. But you're also falling in love and loving the principle of woman, of Shakti, or the principle of Shiva through that man. And you see, that love opens you to loving all beings and all life. It's not an exclusive, you know, romantic cult of two, like, oh, we've got our special thing that nobody else can really relate to. So I think, in my understanding, it's like, yeah, we can take, you know, there is a potential for, let's say, a greater love or romance, but it's a potential that's not sourced in needing and wanting. It's sourced in giving and receiving.
Pete, when I was at that Awaken Life Project wedding, I'm sure, if I'm not mistaken, you read something along these lines.
Yeah.
And from my memory, it went something like, well, I'm adapting it a bit to the story, but like, if the ego is falling in love, it's falling for the illusion of romance, of a story of the ego. And I'm sure that it might have even been a vow that they had of, rather than falling in love in the shadow of the other, we'll rise in love together, or something beautiful about. So when we open the true heart, or really coming to the tantric flow of this overflowing cup of a love that is extending out naturally, because it's just an outward flow, that you rise together, like the yeast in the bread making process, rather than collapsing to a position of lack and a half cup, and you have two half cups. So my experience is that this can happen. And another thing that binds us often is trauma bonding. So if I've been through life this way and it shaped me this way, and I have some attraction to this being that I'm attracted to, whatever my preference, and they're this shape of being, oh, we fit together quite nicely. And for a while, there might be honeymoon, then there might hit the 7-year itch or whatever, hormonal. And there's a great book on that. It's called the Cupid's Poison Arrow. It talks about
Yes, I know that one.
It's fantastic. And it talks about how to combat the hormonal challenges and how to create oxytocin in a lovemaking scenario rather than going for dopamine reward, which porn obviously feeds like crack cocaine. Anyway, but if we find an adapted
You
mode,
need to enlarge your screen, Marcus.
Enlarge it, pin it.
Julian.
Yeah, sure. There we go. Yeah, so we can come into relationship as I did, with love and attraction and alchemy, and we can meet our codependent trauma bonding, and we can stay together and find that other kind of love. So I would say, and mature together, but it takes patience and staying with that person.
Definitely.
And I knew in my relationship that we would reach it one day. So I just want to speak from the other perspective. You can do your self-work, and if you find yourself single at this time, and beautiful sharing that we had from Adrienne, and discern, it's not discrimination, it's to discern, do I feel this attraction is from someone with an overflowing cup, or do I identify my old pattern of making this shape in order to support and mother is one pattern, this immature masculine, or do I see another cup in front of me overflowing, and therefore in my own love of my own evolutionary radiance and flow, discern that I can't make this old shape again and do that. I only will allow in to my romantic story the overflowing cup. So sometimes with patience and with co-practice, we can do it within a relationship that's found itself into difficulties and challenges, and other times we can do the work and see in the other and recognize. So and the other thing I wanted to share on that story of
Can I just say something briefly in response?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's a really important point, because I want to make clear, I'm not suggesting that we all have to wait until we're perfectly overflowing cups consistently before we can enter into this transformational process and intimacy. But we need to have had the intuition of it. We need to have had a taste. We need to have had a recognition that who I am is not fundamentally, there's not fundamentally anything missing. And, and that intuition may come and go. And of course, we all have our, egoic patterning and cultural conditioning. And some have had very difficult time, layers of trauma and all of that. But you see, if that intuition is made the most important value, and we commit to ourselves and our own growth, but also potentially with a partner, that commitment comes first. Then that creates a context for the relationship where, as you said, we can work through, all the layers. It doesn't mean it's all going to be a smooth ride. In fact, quite the contrary. If we're committed to the process of intimacy as an alchemical crucible for awakening, it will bring up everything that we need to see and face and understand and ultimately transcend to be free. It's a purificatory process. So, but yeah, then that commitment, you see, it gives us a grounding in something deeper than, I'm being triggered by you today. Or, in other words, when you have a conflict, if you have a conflict, you don't polarize and separate. Oh, you don't love me, see? Because the love is constantly expressed, reanimated, and ultimately presumed. And then everything can be potentially worked through. And that, that's the only way is through whatever patterning we have to face. But yeah, I really appreciate that point, you see, because then wherever we're at in our own evolutionary unfolding, that is that intention and that commitment that makes everything possible.
Someone's asked about books. So Pete's written a book, The Fire of the Heart. So books to explore this theme. Peter Littlejohn Cook here is also a Tantra teacher and friend of Pete and I. He may have some books to share. I know he has great books on his retreats. That the subject tonight is love. Hafiz poetry, a really good one for feeling into polarity and the mystery. So would you type that one in, Peter, and any others that you think are good? That would be wonderful. And Radical Wholeness is a great book for exploring this masculine and feminine polarity within ourselves and listening to the wisdom of the unifying harmony that the feminine pole of all of our consciousness and bodies have, both male and female, or anybody in between or outside of those binaries. The other thing I wanted to mention, Pete, was decoupling. I'm conscious we're just gone over 8 o'clock, so I'll keep this really brief. But one of the things I trained in is called sexological bodywork. And in that practice, the practitioner remains clothed, wears gloves if they're doing genital work, unlike many neo-tantra practices. And the client is coached into their own body wisdom and to move towards their own learning goals. So we support the person to identify on a spiritual, emotional, sexual level, what their goals are, their growth edges. So you talked about working with shame. That's something we're going to do on the retreat and something I very much do in my work. We move forwards with the session plan. So the individual gets to move towards their learning goals rather than some external authority that Pete pointed to earlier, of like the patriarchy. They know what medical system should be, when you should do this, that, and the other, and you need to do these tests. And there's an external authority, which sometimes we need. I'm not poo-pooing Western medicine, but to foster and cultivate the intuition from within to guide a session structure so that we can decouple our romantic programming and hopes and wishes and strategies from our innate desire to understand ourselves better. It's a whole different type of work, which you can apply not only to sexuality, than expert model, external authority telling you how to fix yourself. So there can be a decoupling, for what the question was from Elaine, on romance and sexual practice. And Peter Littlejohn Cook, who's here, I would like to invite to maybe say a word on this, because I was on his retreat some years ago, and he was talking about the lineages he trained in, into finding partners for coupled or dual cultivation tantra practices, which, like Pete Bampton said, is nothing to do with romance. And often in those traditions of tantra, people didn't practice as young lovers with their future bride or husband to be. They actually gained the polarity charge and knowledge of their own eros in very well, maybe Peter could say, because he taught me that. Would you like to share a little bit about that, Peter?
Hi there. Yeah.
Make your screen bigger. Here we go.
So the context, it's a bit of an extraordinary circumstance, let's say. What Julian's talking about, it's not, let's say, it's not for everyone. It's probably not really for modern times at all. But what I was sharing was how different, it was really to contrast how different the modern idea of Tantra and the ancient way it was practiced. And so in some traditions, it's not that this was across all types of Tantra, but in some traditions, there would be gatherings for sexual practices, and it wouldn't be with your partner. It wouldn't be a romantic thing. It wouldn't be about your intimacy with your partner. That was absolutely not the context. So you would be put together with someone for the sake of the ritual, for the sake of the process, and you would basically, it's like you wouldn't be yourself, that person wouldn't be themselves, there would be no sense of identity associated with it, no personal relationship, because it would be the transpersonal that was being experienced and attuned to. It was the absolute that was being connected with in this let's say symbolic union, creating the totality. So it had nothing to do with the person involved, and so it was intentionally someone that we didn't have a personal relationship with that this was done with. But this isn't a model for for relationship. This is a totally different context.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, but while it's not necessarily a model for relationship in the world and time we're living in, it does throw more light onto this distinction we were just making of, the romantic cult of two and coming together in emotional sexual relationship. Where we're in a context where, there's deep love, and one may, there's all those dimensions of relationship with one's partner. But essentially, what is being animated and enlivened and shared is what we could say it's the pulse of the one dancing between two. And then there's that consistent. This is my own experience. Is then if there's a consistent sense of being animated and alive and porous to the absolute, as you were describing, to what we could call the great one, to ecstasy, and there's a sense of eternity, and there's no beginnings and endings within the context of the relationship, and that also goes for of course, in the sexual arena, which is a whole other subject.
Pete, I would love to offer in closing another closing body poem round to see in all our beings where we've ended up as experiential relational beings in this virtual room together. And I just, if it's okay, wanted to share the link between being a full cup, the sacred dance of Shiva and Shakti in dynamic movement within the individual and within potential relationships, both romantic, spiritual, friendships, or any kind, and they're timeless. When I became a practitioner and I learned how to get the ego out of the way and really be in service, my dark night of the soul, fear of non-existence, went away. When I was trying to be the clever therapist in the treatment model that I was trying to describe earlier, of the external person who could help and fix the pain and suffering of others, it came from the mind and the ego. And sometimes it seemed to work. But I always saw in some of my clients' eyes, I often saw in clients' eyes, something that I'd now describe as that I didn't fully see them. There was layers of them that didn't get seen because my cleverness was working on their story, and together we made a new story and they left. Whereas what I feel that you're speaking to in the practice that we can get to is, and it's in this cheesy saying, which is so true, of to give is to receive. When we're in true flow, as a kriya or a dharma, rather than karma creating drama, there's zero fear in my being. Time kind of doesn't exist either. I have zero fear. I have complete surrender and clarity and trust in the emergent intelligence of that moment. And I think that a lot of authors and teachers are pointing to that. And in that, there's a decoupling, which is what I was talking about. And sexological bodywork done well brings in the ethics and code of conduct, which I was pointing to with some of the elements that make that up, where we come out of aversion and attraction. We might have a client and we're attracted to them, but if we're going to let our attraction override our ability to serve them, then we're not in service and we're doing something else. And that's at the worst is abuse. So if we can be in service, this repulsion and attraction, duality, polarity, duality, drives a lot of human behavior. And it's understood in Buddhism and Tantra and many spiritual traditions that we move away from pain and towards pleasure, for example. But if we can learn to be in this state when the external circumstances might lend them to more towards discomfort, cold, challenge, or bliss, luxury, comfort, pleasure, and use these as a practice to knowing, can I return to my true being and be in service to myself and others? My computer's doing funny fireworks behind me.
Oh wow, it's your true being exploding around you.
Yeah, I don't know how that happens. I can't turn it off. Then this can be an amazing spiritual practice. We're decoupling the dance of attraction and repulsion and pleasure and pain, or life and death, to presence, connection, and service. And my teacher, Marshall Rosenberg, said he did a study around the world, sex, drugs, rock and roll, asked all traditions around the world that he could visit, what's the most satisfying thing in life? And they all ended up on to serve life, to make life more beautiful, more wonderful for other people, vastly more satisfying than any of the other alluring temptations in life. So I just wanted to close with that. Elaine's asked, how was the ego dissolved? 8:11, a few minutes ago.
Maybe we'll go into that one
that
next week.
That was when Peter was describing the tantric lessons, and I thought, okay, you get two people together, you have to have a ritual to dissolve the ego, obviously, before they start training, right, Peter?
Well,
I mean, you would have to.
Yeah, I'll just be as brief as I can because we need to.
Which Peter was it?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Well, I think that this whole matter of the dissolution of ego, we all experience moments, and some of us longer interludes where that occurs. I believe all humans beings do, and that's also part of why people are obsessed with sex, because orgasm, as the French call it, le petit mort, is the little death. What is it that dies? It's the sense of self, the tyranny of the mind, you see. So that's part of why people are so obsessed, is because everyone's seeking release from the tyranny of this illusion of being a separate self. You know, when someone would see a beautiful sunset, or you walk into a forest and there's just this dissolution of identity, right? Everybody's longing for God. You know, whether you're the yogi sitting in a cave on a mountain, or you're a heroin addict, everyone's longing for that. And the dissolution begins when you start to recognize that you're not going to discover God by seeking outside yourself, and you start to recognize, no, it's always already the case. You know, I'm just blind to it because I've been so conditioned to seek. It all starts when we're a baby sucking on the tit, right? And then at a certain point, have you ever seen, you see a baby on the tit, they're in bliss, right? But at a certain point, the tit is taken away, and then we spend the rest of our lives looking for the tit.
Well, you can go further back and say the womb is taken away when you come out of it.
There you go. So yeah, so I feel it's just when we begin to have that intuition, then the ego starts to lose its fundamental grip and stops running the show of the body mind. And that's a process, you know, it's an awakening process. It doesn't all just happen overnight.
Oh, it's a daily thing to recognize when you're leading your life from your ego and when you're leading from your heart. Absolutely. It's a constant let me catch that.
Yeah.
That's a spiritual, that's being in practice daily.
That's it. Yeah.
And on the topic of more calls, Pete's suggested that we do this more regularly, maybe the same time each Thursday. We need to look at our calendars as to see whether that's feasible. But the places to check whether that's going to happen will be Pete's website, which is fireoftheheart.net.
Fireoftheheart.net.
Or mine, relationalbodywork.com. which I'll put here. Let me put them here. Can you type yours, Pete,
Mhm.
in the chat there? And
Do
then
you
if
all have mailing lists that you
Yeah.
send out things?
I have
Yeah,
a
I have a
Telegram group.
there's a newsletter sign up.
Okay.
I'll
And
just
that's for, I wrote that down. Rational body work, right?
relational body work.
I mean,
Yeah, I have a
relational.
yeah, relational body work. I have a Telegram channel.
I don't do Telegram, but maybe some other people.
It's also a Facebook group. It's also on my website. We'll have news and things, or if you prefer, on both of our websites, we have information about this topic, and we can put any more calls on this topic on our pages on our websites. Peter, thanks for joining us, and good night. Boa noite.
Bye night, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Who would like a quick round of closing body poem? Who has 2 minutes? If you've got to go, I realize we've run 20 minutes over. I'm going to turn off these and we'll do a thumbs up. If we all want to go, we'll just go. But if we're up for that, could you type yes in the chat if you'd like to close this with hearing from everyone here where we're all at to close? And so some yeses coming. Beautiful. So I invite you to connect again with this sense of gratitude. At the beginning, we were smiling to our breath, smiling to the feminine pole of our feeling and noticing what we want from tonight. And I invite you to get comfortable again, get the torso supported, and dropping into this internal space again, coming to stillness with all that's been shared, all the thinking and feeling that's happened inside your body being. And just smiling if there's gratitude to people exploring this topic, to share it in the world. And smiling with gratitude to appreciate yourself for coming tonight, for caring, for that longing for truth, peace, whatever quality is most important in this moment for you in your life. And I invite you to use words that come close to feeling or describing, what you're feeling right now. So this might be a sensation, might be an emotion, or it might be a statement. Just noticing what arises out of the feeling pole of our being in the body or our subconscious mind, this hidden and often forgotten aspect of ourself. Just noticing what rises up. It might be a simple word or statement or quality or emotion. Just sharing what you're noticing inside right now. Beautiful things emerging here. I'm just going to expand my chat so I can read them.
I want to dance.
You want to dance? Cool.
The dance of Shiva and Shakti.
I'm a belly dancer too.
Oh, really?
Talk about divine feminine. Ladies, if you want coaching.
So our community body poem in service of integration and moving the implicit to explicit so we can all share our emotional being states. We've got warm milk and honey running through the veins, an open heart, gratitude. Thank you all, expansion of being, inner smile, connection, natural radiance, delight, connection, joy, pleasure, bliss, flow, discovery, happiness, love, expansion, saltiness, saltymess.com. Saltymess.com. Is that your website? Can't hear you now, Elaine. You're muted.
Soul Times, my website, Soul Times.
Soul Times.
TYM.
Cool.
All right.
God.
Check that out. Is there some belly dancing on there?
No, I don't have it on there. I had it, but didn't. I took it off. Yeah, this is mainly life coaching and tantra, although it's hidden behind hot stone therapy.
Cool. God realization, happiness, love, expansion, discovery, delight, connection, joy, pleasure, bliss, flow. Natural radiance, connection, inner smile, expansion of being, warm milk and honey running through the veins, open heart, gratitude. Thank you all. Yes, yes. Thank you all. Thank you all. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Be you until full. Beautiful.
Lovely. So thank you all. And maybe we do this next week at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laurel Erica, Word Magic Global.
Who's that?
Takes apart words like the week,
Oh.
Like
weekday, the weekend, good morning, like morning lost. She takes it apart, the etymology of words, and she raps. And she's an older lady.
Cool. Type it in. His story, you know, history being the story of the patriarchy, his story. I like when Laurel Erica.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you all for coming, and Pete and I will announce it. But maybe same place, same time next week. If you want to come back for more exploration on this, we'll share some little practices each time that we do it. It's been a joy, Pete. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for inviting me to co-lead the retreat in March. So
right, I think we've got something cooking here.
Yeah. Thank you all, beautiful people.
Okay, thanks. Glad for the synchronicity today.
Yeah.
Don't always log on to Facebook, and I just did, and there was an invite, and I took it. And
awesome.
There you go.
Thanks for
I'll go to the
coming.
website and get on the mailing list.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I'll put a mailing list on my site. I need to add mine. Put it back.
One's good enough.
Join
have
Pete.
a different thing.
Cool.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Bye.